Welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the place where you can learn how to create a dental practice and a business life that you love. Listen in with Dr. David Moffet as he interviews successful entrepreneurs and successful business people and successful dentists as they share their business successes, their stories, and their breakthrough ideas, sharing pearls of wisdom that you can take back to your practice and implement immediately so that you can have that great practice with more patients, higher profits, and less stress. This is the podcast where great dental practices meet with successful business processes. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies that will help you grow your dental practice faster. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Moffet.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Moffet. I'm in Burrowang in New South Wales. As you well know, it is Friday morning, coming up to 9:45 in the morning, and gives me great pleasure to welcome somebody who I've known for a long time, met in person. Haven't chatted for a little while now, but good to catch up with, Dr. Mark Davis. He's in Manhattan Beach, which, as many Americans know, is actually in the Los Angeles area of California, where, by my calculations, it must be coming up to 2:45 in the afternoon, Thursday afternoon. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Perfect. Well, there you go. And I've done that purely in my head off the time on my computer. I don't have a USA clock here in front of me, but it's nice at this time of the year. I always like to say you're 5 hours ahead, but a day behind. That's the easiest one, because saying 19 hours behind kind of makes the maths a lot harder.
Yes.
And so it's good to catch up. Now, we met probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I think, at a dental speakers meeting. Was that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and we've stayed in touch. We've got a lot in common, amazingly. Both being dentists. We have the same initials, though yours are back to front to mine. And we both married on the same day, 1 year apart, which means that your wedding would have been on a Sunday and mine was on a Saturday. But other than that, there is, and we're still both married to the same wife after 36 years for me, 35 years for you. So, we're in a pretty unique sort of club.
We are.
Yeah. Anyway, great to chat. And thank you. You actually reached out to me because I've been doing this podcast now for about 17 months. And you reached out and said, can we chat on the podcast? And you've got a very interesting story, because here's where we differ. As a dentist, I was one practice 20 out of my 35 years as a practicing dentist. 4 years before, I worked a job for 1 year and then 3 years. Then I bought my office, had it for 28 years. When I left, that was more than half my life, more than, I was 55 and 28 is half of 56. And then I worked for a couple of years before arthritis took over my hands. And so I decided to retire myself clinically. But your story is remarkably different in the fact that you are still a practice owner and you're on your 16th practice of ownership. And to me, that's a great story, because there must be so many lessons that you have learnt and you have applied to that career of practice ownership that every dentist needs to hear, because most dentists never hear any stories and they just go through their life making mistakes and on their own that they shouldn't be making, and then fixing them on their own, which they shouldn't be doing either. So let's wind the clock back to Mark Davis, finishing dental school. How did it all start?
I went to Loma Linda University in Southern California, and I thought dentistry was going to be a great fit for me. My dad was an orthopedic surgeon, and I saw his hours, and I thought, I think I want something a little more defined hours. I didn't want to be on call at night and work on weekends, so dentistry seemed to fit the bill. I was a bit dismayed in dental school, to tell you the truth. My sophomore year, I got up out of the first quarter of my sophomore year, and I just marched up to the dean's office. I said, if I take a year off, can I come back the next year? He said, okay. And I did. I just needed, I didn't take a gap year from college, and I just I was unsure of my pathway in dentistry, and it wasn't going great for me. So I just took that year off, and I was able to refocus, and I did ultimately come back after a couple of bad jobs. One fun job, but I was a ski instructor for that winter. And then I came back and I worked a couple of really dead end jobs. And I thought I'm going to go back to dental school. So I finished up strong. And even when I got out, I was a little dismayed. I thought, "Oh, this is not fitting my personality very well, but here we go. I'm not turning around now." So I break my career up into 3 different careers. My first 10 years, I was an associate. I did have one solo practice in there. And then my second 10 years, my wife and I moved up to Washington State. And that was really where the light went on for me. I'm like, oh, this works with multiple practices and having associates, because I had 4 really, really good practices up there. And then we moved back to California. Our parents were getting older and we just felt like the need to come back. So we moved back, and I duplicated what I did in Washington, but probably not with the same precision that I had in Washington. But I had probably 8 practices that I came back to in California. So I look at it 3 different, time periods in my life. And now I'm down to my very last practice, very part-time, and not sure how much longer, but I can kind of see the finish line with clinical dentistry.
So when you were up in Washington, you had 4 practices at one time,
I
and
did.
and then back in California, 8 practices at one time?
California, I had probably the most at one time was like 6. I never got to more than that. But I juggled. There's a couple I had and sold and merged and kind of condensed them a little bit. So it was just a little bit different show there. California was tough go. I mean, it's a hard state to practice dentistry. Washington was great. I know it's changed now a bit, but if I had some golden years, that was really the time I was in Washington State. My first, 10 years, like I said, I was an associate. I learned a lot from different dentists. I just worked for all types of different things. Indian Health Services. I worked quality assurance, which I was hardly qualified to do that, but I did it. And I did have a solo practice for about 5 years there, but I actually realized when I was in that solo practice, I go, I don't know if this is a good fit. I felt too time constraining for me. And I thought I got to find a way that I can still work and live the life that I felt like I really wanted to live. And that was being active and doing different adventures and staying really active with sports and travel.
So let's look at the reasons for owning multiple practices was so that with multiple employee dentists or associate dentists, so that you could provide dental services to the community, you could have the benefits of owning the business, and you could work the hours that you wanted to, as opposed to being a one-man or a two-man practice that is very busy, where you still got to work 4 or 5 or 6 days solid.
Right.
What was the lifestyle driver for you in terms of what were the limitations you put on your clinical hours so that you
Um,
could then put your employees in place on the other hours or days?
when I was in town, I would work, a normal full day. I worked hard. I could see a lot of patients. I could run 3, 4 rooms pretty efficiently with hygiene. I had a terrific manager there that she was the wife of the husband that I bought the practice, and she had a very good global vision of dentistry very at that period of time. And she really helped me pull together staff and just kept things running while there's a few times I just took a month off. I'm out of here. And, the practices ran great. And that really that was the formula that would work. And I love that aspect of it, that I didn't feel like, I strangled, that I just couldn't take time off or couldn't leave. So that really opened my eyes. And I really thought, and I was ready to leave. But she was a wonderful manager for me, but it was time for me to go from that scenario. So we moved on to California, and I thought I'll be able to duplicate this fairly easy, but it wasn't easy. I did it, but it, it was stressful a little bit, but here I am.
How was it stressful? How was it different? And why was that difference stressful?
I think where I decided to practice was a expensive area, staffing, finding associate doctors, finding staff, cost of staff were just ratcheted so much higher. And so the margin was just that much tighter to be able to do that. And that's why I thought the years in Washington were great. Cost, just things made sense math wise when you ran a business. You can actually make money. Back in California, everything was just a little more regulated and more cost and more taxes. It just made it a harder show to run for sure.
Did you ever contemplate going back to Washington where the grass was greener?
No, I like the Pacific Northwest. I did not like the weather. I don't mean to offend any people from Washington, but it was pretty rainy up there. It was time for it was time for it to move on. I I'm always looking forward. I don't look backwards. I mean, you can do a couple of coulda, woulda, shouldas, but I did the right thing and learned some new things on the way. I mean, I thought I knew a lot when I was in Washington of how I was juggling those practices. And then I seemed to up my game a little bit more in California because it just became more critical to watch everything even that much tighter.
So 6 practices at a time, how do you watch 6 practices so tightly?
I had good managers in each practice. I was still practicing. Not easy. I think that actually taught me a lot of lessons of not getting mired down too much with some of the nitty gritty of things that were not important. And I could, really react to the important things and not to all the unimportant things. The lesson I learned, I think, really from multiple practices if I got stuck, I was able to quickly pivot and find a pathway that seemed to make sense. I just didn't get mired into some of the just minutia and the details that didn't matter. And I just focused in on the things that made things run better.
I think a lot of dentists in their own practice, running their own one practice, that tends to be their downfall and prevent them from making progress, is that they do get bogged down, caught in the weeds, and start micromanaging their
Yeah.
office. Whereas it sounds to me that what you did was you macromanaged your offices, looked at
Yeah.
big picture, looked at the things that made the most difference. The old Jim Rohn scenario that, there's only half a dozen things that make 80% of the difference. And if you just focus on those 6 things, you'll have a successful business.
Yeah.
When you start focusing on the little stuff, you get the 6 big things just fall apart. So, but you're
I
doing
would agree.
it with 6 different practices. So it still sounds like a very busy life. And
It
then you've got
was a busy life.
oh,
I mean, listen, I made a lot of mistakes and I had some practices that, underperformed. And so it was just a bed of roses for sure. There was a lot of stress that was involved and dealing with banks and lending and all the different things that go along with it. Getting associates and getting along with the associates and making sure that we're on the same page and, they're not leaving. I mean, my theory on associates is there are 2 types, the ones you want and the ones you don't want. And the ones you want won't stay. They know they can do it on their own. And the ones that, you really probably don't want, they'll stay forever. And you got to keep looking for replacements for those. But it's like I said, I don't know if you could do a life reversal and would I do that again? I don't know. I don't have a lot of regrets, but there was some stress involved with it. And plus I lived away from really where I lived. And so I had that part of life that made it even a little more stressful because I wasn't just going home every day when I was back in California.
yeah, California's a big place when you got to drive it.
Yeah.
It's a lot bigger than Rhode Island. Spoke to Fred Joyle last week, and I said, "You're in California?" He said, "No, I've moved to Rhode Island." I said, "What, for the weather?" He said, "No, not the weather." He said he had some family there, so much like you, he moved to
He
be
used to
with.
live in Manhattan Beach.
He did,
He did.
because I used to follow him on Strava and see
Yeah.
his exercise routine, his
Mhm.
bike riding.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to ask him that question.
Mm.
All those practices that you had, what was the shortest ownership of one office? Like, you obviously that would be an office that you bought that didn't respond quickly to the things that you thought would to make it better. Is that a cut it loose quickly sort of philosophy you had with those? And then which ones did you keep for longer or the longest? And why did you sell those? For a profit? Or so that's a two-part question.
The practices that I've kept for the longest were where I had either a built-in partner with them. They weren't all so I did have partners in some of them, and I invited that. So then I knew I had, a pathway of when I was ready to be like, hey, I'm done. So I did that with 3 or 4 of them where I had partners built in, and those made it for easy transitions. And actually, on several of them, I became the bank for them, and it worked out well for me. I didn't get this big lump payout, and so I was able to, not be taxed so heavily and kind of regulate how that comes in and income for a number of years. I had one idea that I thought was going to be a killer idea. I opened a practice from scratch, and I didn't take any insurance. All I took was cash, and I marketed. It was a big agricultural area, so I marketed to a lot of the workers there, and I was 30% less than anybody else because I didn't have all the red tape to go through. And it worked for a while, but it needed a very specific dentist to be able to quickly make a decision, do this procedure, and get moving on, and not get mired down with you got to do a full exam and all this. And I was the right guy because I could quickly sift through a lot of patients, but I couldn't find the right dentist to man that. And so I abandoned ship on that. So that was probably the quickest one that I did. I probably lasted about a year and a half, 2 years with that. But I thought I said, this is a system that's going to work. But I had a hard time finding the right guy or gal.
Well, I guess, did you ever get stolen from? Because if you're dealing in cash only, that's a
Yeah, we were open not full time, so I think on that situation, I don't felt like I got embezzled at all. I mean, I have been embezzled in one of my practices. In fact, in the practice my last practice right now is the one that got embezzled, and that's why I inserted myself there to help it out. I've owned it for about 10 years, and I've only worked in it for like 2, but I'm very part time, so we'll see the future on that.
It's interesting. We were talking beforehand about when I go to Sydney to watch the cricket every year, and I go with a dentist friend, and he worked in a practice as an emergency dentist and then became a partner in that practice. And the owner of the practice said, so emergencies like Saturday night, Sunday night,
Mhm,
there was shifts, Saturday day, Sunday day as well.
mhm.
And the owner said, he said, "You are the best emergency dentist that we've ever had." And he was surprised. He said, because he said, "There's times when I'm not busy, and surely you must have had others who were busier." And he figured in his discussion with me was that because there was a lot of cash back in those days in the 70s, whereas now everything's just tap and go,
Mhm,
felt that there were dentists working on the emergency shift who were just putting the money in their pocket, and
mhm.
patients' records weren't even there sometimes. So that
Yeah.
was, and subsequent to that, I hope he's not watching this because he'll identify himself. But when he became a partner, they had a receptionist who stole from 4 of the 5 partners, but didn't steal from him because she knew that he checked his numbers every day. But she was married to one of the partners, and she was stealing from that partner as well. So, tell us about your embezzlement, because I'm always fascinated with embezzlement stories.
Um,
How did you find it, and how did you
so
realize?
practice that the practice that was embezzled was one I really took my eyes off of, I have to admit. And I own this with another partner, and we both did. It ran well, it did big numbers, and I had enough going on with my other practices that I'm like, I just don't have the time to a bit out of the circle of where my other practices were. My others were in a pretty tight circle. This one was in a radius of a couple 100 miles away. So I really didn't pay attention. I mean, sadly, it was like, well, it's not costing me money at this time. It's doing fine. I'm not making a lot of money, but that was kind of where I was mentally at it because I just didn't have the bandwidth. I knew it started struggling. Then once the doctor retired, the owner doctor, then the numbers just really started falling off in production, and bills were getting really hard to pay. And then they started asking us for money, and I'm like, something's going on. So I inserted myself back into that practice and worked, and I just saw, what was happening. And I knew that there was plenty of work and there was production that, and it really wasn't even done, at a high secret level. They were just using our money to pay bills for some of the other consulting that he or she was doing and overpaying, and it just kept scraping off, it wasn't big chunks, but it was enough that it was costing the practice and creating the owners to put money back into it. So I finally said, there's something really fishy here. And so that I just started going through the books and I said, this is what's going on.
So did they get a holiday in a prison? Did
I contacted an attorney that specifically dealt with fraud like this. And he just said, honestly, he told me, he goes, I think you should just let it go. He goes, you're going to pay me. We're not going to get anything out of him or her. And you're going to be frustrated because you're spending a lot of time and money and it's not going to go anywhere. And I'm like, fair enough. So I confronted the person. They paid back some. And I just said, let's just cut bait and that's it. And I didn't want that. I mean, this is latter part of my, clinical career right now we're talking about. And I'm like, I don't want the weight of this to define how I felt about dentistry and what went on. And so I just quickly, just in my mind, I got to go to a different place. And positive thoughts will create positive energy. And that's what I did, not got mired down. And I think, again, going back to the multiple practices, there's some things that didn't go great and I just didn't get too bogged down with that. And this is one of them. And I just decided to not be better, or I just rose above and just said, I don't want this to be the defining last phase of my career that I got to taste this very long. So I've moved on really quickly.
It's interesting you came to that almost like an epiphany that the value of your mind was better to just let it go than to chase it and go through the problem. And to have a lawyer or an attorney who told you this is not going to end well and it's going to wear you out, it's often said that in any legal battle there are always two winners, and that's the lawyers from both sides.
Yeah. I listened to that and I just decided I think it makes sense. And I just went with his help. We wrote a letter and explained what we had found and what we thought was the value, and to try to see if we could, come up with a reasonable reimbursement to us, but we got some.
Mm.
It was, so I really think I'm sure there's a million ways I probably got maybe ripped off throughout my career and by little bits. I don't know. I really don't know, but that's the only one that I actually have sensed and felt and know that it happened right in front of my eyes.
Yeah, it can be disappointing. We had an employee that we valued who was showing the signs of being a thief, the lavish clothes and lifestyle. And it took me a while to convince my wife that she was stealing. I thought she was stealing from us, but she was actually stealing from a government-funded health program by fraudulently putting in treatment, and the government would pay back. There was an avenue to say that the patient had paid the dentist for the treatment and therefore the patient needed to be reimbursed by the government. And so she was, back in those days, putting in her bank account details. She had three
Would
different
that have come back on you as being insurance fraud? Because she was doing it in your office? No?
It came that she was stealing from the government. Not only was she stealing the money that she got, but every time she tried to put in a treatment where the patient may have left our office and gone to another office and exhausted their entitlement, that was an attempted. So she got $450,000 out of the government, and then she had another $250,000 of attempted efforts where the patients had gone elsewhere. She conceded straight away, so it became an action between the government and her. She got a 3-year holiday in Her Majesty's prison. But I'm sure that she stole from us as well. But I haven't got David Harris to come down from Canada to look. He couldn't find it. Well, she did it because every time that she put the treatment through that these people were entitled to, that they didn't have, she actually stole from our associate dentist, because it was in an office that I owned as a branch office, and she stole from the associate dentist. And of course, I would have got 60% of that for running my business.
Yeah. It's a hard pill to swallow. It's maddening, and I think, it happens, and not that you want it to, but I also think the lesson learned is sometimes, do what you can, but maybe you don't let it define you and mire you down too long. I mean, you have to rise above it and move on.
I once played golf with a chap who owned a cafe in Sydney CBD, and I said, "What do you do about the theft?" He goes, "We just factor it in." He said, the consumer just pays. It's factored into the price of the coffee. We know they're handling cash. We know they're going to be stealing. We know that they're going to be undercharging. We just say, all right, they're only short-term
Not a bad idea.
employees. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's just bury ourselves in that.
Yeah.
And that's a sad indictment on society in general. And I guess going back to my friend, the emergency dentist, he asked me this question. He said, "Did you, because I worked in a sales job in a stationery store, news agency back in the day." And he said, "Did you ever think with all that cash to take any other till?" I said, "Never. It never crossed my mind that I was entitled to take it because somebody else wasn't watching or counting." And they weren't. They just used to come and just pull out wads of money when the drawer got full. So back in those days, nothing was measured on margins, and tax office measures you on margins now, not so much in dentistry, but in restaurants, food
Right.
mart, how much you should be selling your prepared food for after you've bought the raw ingredients. Anyway, let's get away from the nasty part of dentistry
Well,
because
the emergency office I built with just cash, I really thought that could be a stepping stone to go into ERs, because if you go to an ER, at least in, the States, they don't really have dental coverage. You'll get antibiotics, and maybe they can give you some kind of a block to give you pain. But if you could somehow, and maybe you could find the right ER, that you could even have a dentist on staff that could quickly do the treatment if they had the skill and the ability. But that was my thinking of when I started that process. I go, this could expand into a lot of different hospitals. That's really where I was kind of focused with, but it didn't go there.
it was an idea.
It was an idea.
My first job involved it was a very slow practice that had been going for 2 years, and the owner had a year to go on his lease, and his wife and he decided they would go to the UK to work on the national health, and so he asked me if I would finish the lease, but it was so slow I had to do emergencies, and it was across the other side of Sydney from where I had grown up. And so I moved over there, and so I would do these emergency, call outs back in, we're talking the early and mid '80s. But then when I bought my own office in '87, unbeknownst to me, that the owner had taken a job near his home, and so every patient that he saw at his office that he sold to me, who was a personal friend, disappeared as patients of the office. All of a sudden, I had an empty book, and so I also had to do emergency work there for 2 or 3 years. In fact, I say that I didn't get to watch Princess Diana's funeral because I was down doing an emergency pulp extirpation while that was on TV. I think we had it up on the TV on the roof, whatever year that was. But again, lesson learned. But that emergency ER style within your own practice, that then petered out as people started working longer hours in dentistry, and then you ended up US style, having a dentist on every corner. So there's a lot of things that changed from those days. Plus I'll tell you one lesson I learned from emergency dentistry was in the yellow pages, you couldn't advertise yourself in the yellow pages. You had to have, every dentist had to have a normal print, one line, and an alphabetical listing only. But if you ran an emergency business not owned by a dentist or owned by your service company, you could have big ads in that section. Taught me that when people looked for a dentist 9 to 5, they didn't go to the index at the front and say, dentists, they're on this section. They started flicking through alphabetically and go, oh, look at all these big ads for dentists. And they would be calling the emergency dentist during daytime hours. And so that was a light bulb moment. And then the legislation was that you could have bigger ads in those, and half page and full page ads. And so I was right on top of that as well in the emergency section. And then when it went to
Interesting.
dentistry, I was on top of that. So at one stage, I was number 3 out of 17 full-page ads in dentistry in the yellow pages. But I was monitoring the income each year, and I could see that gradually each year it was going down and down. And so when I pulled my ad, my full-page ad, I said, the money I'm making, the money it's costing me 2 months of dentistry to pay for this ad. And I'm now only making that money back. So I said, I may as well just close my doors for 2 months and
Mhm.
not have that expense, knowing that it's deteriorating. The Yellow Pages guys didn't, because what they didn't tell me was that year it went from 17 down to 5 the next year of full page ads, and then down and down and down till less and less, because then the internet had come in as
Right.
well. But anyway,
I
listen, so
remember the Yellow Page days.
well, the good thing about Yellow Pages were that in the old days with computers, they were the best things for jacking up your monitor on. But, then they got thinner and thinner, so you needed more volumes. You had to steal other people's volumes. So, I've still got a photo somewhere, Mark, where Sydney went from 2, A to K, L to Z, and then went to a tiny little one that's half the size in a 12-month period, and now it is no more. A long career as a dental practice owner, but now you're talking about helping dentists, taking that IP that you have in your head of what you did well and what worked for you to create the model that you wanted, and
Mhm.
being able to share that with dentists who have probably never heard of that sort of model being available, and how they can still have a business, have multiple practices, and still have a lifestyle that allows them to not burn out their relationships with their spouse, with their children, but have a very satisfying and active life. Is that where you're going now with this as you wind
Yeah.
out of your last practice? Tell us
Yeah.
about that journey that you have, that you're working on, because I know it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And
It's called dentalsimplified.com. And really, it's just trying to simplify. I'm here to help the dentist. I'm not here to help systems, processes, hygienists, HR, none of that. Just really to help the dentist create a day that is productive, but feels stress free. And that is really what my career has been about. Find simple solutions and simple answers to make the day go easy. I don't get into quarrels with patients. I don't get into spats with my staff. I'm still in contact with my very first practice when I first got out of school with some of the staff there. I got along with them. I just didn't have breakdowns with relationships. And I model this of that's my longevity of making things simple. I've been able to go home. I don't bring my work home. I don't bring my home to work. Just leave it there. When I come through the door the next day, I can pick it up there. But I understand the patient. I understand what they need. I don't spend a lot of extra time with a patient that doesn't want to hear what I have to say. If they do, then I can lean in and we can talk more about what they want to do. But I try to be efficient with my day, get done on time, get all the breaks done efficiently. Everybody gets lunch, and it just doesn't feel like it's just a drag show every day. But, you do that one day, it leads it to a week, to a month, to a year, and to a career of not being efficient and not finding that happiness. I am a dentist, but I don't completely identify being a dentist all the time. I love doing other things, and having that mindset has really been able to help me create, a life that I have really enjoyed.
it's interesting. My wife used to say about our son, I have a son and a daughter, but when he was an infant, she said, he's not a naughty boy, he just does naughty things. And he grew out of that very quickly. In fact, as a junior school student, he used to get frustrated that the other kids wouldn't pay attention in class. He used to come home frustrated that they weren't there to learn like him. But that phrase, he's not a naughty boy, he just does naughty things. I applied that when people say to me, oh, you're a dentist, you're a typical dentist. And you would probably agree that you're not a typical dentist. And so what I say is, no, I'm David. Dentistry is just what I did for a living. It doesn't define me as who I am. And sure, there are dentists who can be put in that box, that there are, that they're C-type people, they're analytical, they're engineers
Yeah.
or school teachers, that sort of brain.
Yeah.
You and I are, again, back to what I said at the start, we're very similar, but we're not typical dentists. We think outside the box, or as somebody who I interviewed this week said, it was a quote from Einstein, sure, try and think outside the box, but remember this, there is no box.
I
And
like
so
that.
that is so good. I don't know if it's Einstein or just the internet,
That's
but that
great.
is so good because there are so many possibilities, and you've done that. That's when I was asking those questions before about in practice ownership, were you working intensely clinically and intensely administratively as well? You said when it needed it, you did it, but when it didn't, you took advantage and had your lifestyle. And we were talking before we started recording about Gary Tackix, who is he's the podfather of dentistry. He started the first dental podcast, and he's done 1,400. I think he's been doing them for that long. Was it 1,400 podcasts? That's seven years, or is it the other way around? Sorry, I'm on my maths. But anyway, Gary was a non-practicing. He wasn't a dentist, but he coached dentists. But he bought a dental practice when he found out he could in his state. But he bought it in partnership with dentists, and he set it up that the first dentist only worked 3 days a week. I think he was working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then when they brought their next partner in, was working 3 days a week. No, first guy was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The second guy was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then the third partner was working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So they all worked 3 days. They all had 4-day weekends, which included Saturday and Sunday. Now, doesn't that sound like that's not your typical dentist? But he said so well. And like you, he was able to, as the non-practicing dentist and also non-practicing owner, but also the older partner, he was able to define his own exit and go to them when he said, look, I'm ready to leave. And so the path was there for the others to buy his share.
Yeah.
But
That's a great way.
it's a great model, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
I used to work 2 and 2, like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday was a recharge. And I changed from Wednesday to Thursday off because I changed golf club, and the golf club I changed to didn't play on Wednesdays; they played on Thursdays, and
There
that
you
was
go.
it for those final 7 or 8 years of my office. That was kind of weird because I worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and had Thursday off, and Friday was kind of like it was like a free hit, It was kind of like, oh yeah, I got to go to work for one day. That's all. And so
Right.
Jane and I would do Wednesday night date night. It was the end of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We'd go out for dinner on a date night, and that became part of our weekly ritual. And a lot of people who own dental practices and are dentists they tend to neglect their family and their
Yeah.
spouse, and that's a sure way to lengthen your practicing career because every time you have to give away half your fortune because you've
Exactly.
neglected your relationship, it's to start again. It's a
Yeah.
total, and that's not
Yeah.
fun.
No.
Is that something that you plan to be able to help dentists to create that cliche of a work-life balance, but just to make sure that they don't become obsessed with dentistry as their life?
I mean, I think I can. It's not that complicated. I mean, I feel like I'm very simple on a lot of levels, and I have always hunting for simplicity in my life. I don't like things to be too complicated. I became very good clinically, and I learned a lot of shortcuts. Shortcuts probably could be taken wrong by dentists, like, well, I don't do it that way. I don't feel comfortable doing it that way. But I learned how to shorten up procedures for myself. And I learned, more importantly, I thought of them as gears. If I'm super busy, I can, throttle through a lot of patients. But first gear, let's say, is like giving an injection. I will never deviate from that gear when I'm giving an injection because I get told all the time, oh, that's the best injection I've had. I'm sure a lot of dentists hear that, but I really take pride in giving them really comfortable, and I get them really numb. I just do not want any bouncing around or they're feeling it. So I really work hard on that. And then once they're numb, then you can go to town, finish it, get it done. And they're not there for, massage. They're there to get this thing done and they get on with their lives. I had that mentality. So I really kind of structured how I did things. And if the day wasn't busy, then you get kind of stuck in a gear that's not so efficient. But I was more efficient when I was busier. And I just feel like I have tips and a lot of things to help dentists maybe see a different perspective of what they're stressing about and what is creating anxiety between them and the patient or them and the staff. And I think you can just put it in a different place and not always have to internalize everything that happens. I mean, there's a lot of patients that don't like me, but I'm like, okay, I just don't worry about that kind of stuff very often. I take care of the patient. That's the priority. Or that's what you're there for. The number two is take care of the staff. Treat them right. Don't belittle them. Get them out on time. Get their breaks. Let them feel like they can function and not suffocate them. And then the last person I take care of is myself. And I think if you can take care of those things in that order, you make a simple day. It never gets away from you. And I've seen, because I've worked with so many different associates and I see so many days just get away from them and they can never get caught up. And the day just is a show, and just doesn't gel. And that's just one day. And then it happens the next day and it creates this whole problem for that office.
You reminded me of something that I used to do as a dentist, which I don't know whether many dentists did, and that was the fact, as you said, make sure they're very numb. So the number of blocks that don't work first time is about 1 in 6.
Yeah.
And so that puts an amazing strain on your time if you haven't got the patient numb. So I worked out that the easiest way to make sure the patient is numb is for every time I've got to give a block, I give 2. And I don't know, there's 3 reasons that it works better. And I don't know which one it is. It's either that you put the second block in the right spot that the first block should have gone, or you put the second block behind the first block in terms that it pushes the first block into the right spot, and so it works quicker.
Yeah.
Or it's just that with time, while you're doing the second block, the first block has soaked into there. But you can start straight away. And so, quadrant dentistry was lovely, especially on the upper. By the time you'd numbed, from the second molar, I still got to get my numbers right for my American viewers, second molar to the premolar, by the time you got to the premolar in numbing, you could just pick the drill up and off you went. And no patient ever says, I only want half the anesthetic. They say, make me as numb. I don't want to feel anything. That's always, how much you want to feel? I don't want to feel anything. So there's the answer to that. But the cost of that injection for the penny pinching dentist is, I've got to pay for twice the anesthetic. But you're getting to do way more dentistry because they're number quicker. And that's just common sense. As
the
you
conversation by them not being numb is they'll have a bad experience.
Sure,
I ask
sure.
patients all the time, why did you have a bad experience? Just tell me what happened. And it's, well, I wasn't numb enough or the shot hurt. And it usually comes down to those two things. And everything else just, is fuzzy from them. Then the procedure just goes sideways for them. But if they're numb, yeah, well, they had to have a couple shots or whatever. But honestly, they'll be like, it wasn't so bad. And they won't walk away with such negative feelings. But if you gave them an uncomfortable shot and then on top of it, it didn't work, or you didn't care enough to make sure that it worked, that will go down as a bad experience.
Yeah.
Number one.
Yeah. Yeah. And they'll think you don't know what you're doing if you haven't got them numb.
Correct.
Because every dentist will know this story, and that is you're doing a cavity on an upper molar. Let's say you're doing the mesial of the first molar, and then you see decay on the distal of the premolar that you didn't see in the x-ray. And so you say to the patient, there's another cavity here. Do you want to come back for that, or would you like me to do it now while it's numb in that area? They all say, can you do it now? They never want to come back and have them done one at a time. But some dentists will go, and you've got all the stuff out. Everything's there. Cutting that tooth takes you 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and the cavity's done, and you're not having to reset. But they go to one tooth at a time. My second employer, who I worked for 3 years, he only ever did one tooth at a time because he felt that patients would feel like they're spending too much if they're having to get 2 fillings done.
Yeah.
I actually educated him on that. You'll love this. We worked together on a Friday afternoon, and there was also another dentist who came in for Fridays and Wednesdays. And on that day, if my figures were ahead of my employer, he would overdo. He would do more treatment and run late because he didn't want me to be more productive than him. And then there's another guy plodding along one tooth at a time. And so patients are going, I've been waiting here for hours. How come everybody's going in before me? They go, oh, you're seeing old doc so-and-so. And it was obvious if I'd had a good week. And we're talking back in the East, Mark, where I think if you made $2,000 for a week, you were doing well in dentistry of treatment. So
Right.
there's a lot that you can share that as to be able to say that you've gotten to 65 and you've had a very stress-free life owning 16 dental offices. Like, there's your headline right there for your coaching business. And then talk about how fit you are and how much you've benefited from being able to not neglect your body and your health while you're practicing dentistry, because that's the other thing, that you spend more time over the patient, you become this twisted, contorted wreck of a body, and that's not good for you either. So congratulations on your career, and it's still not over, and I'm looking forward to that next chapter, because I know who you're working with, who's giving you advice on this, Jeff Busky, and he's a really good guy. And I met him out of the blue just by him following me on LinkedIn. And I thought, this guy and I are on the same page. And so he was one of my early guests on the podcast. So I know him well. And I think that, because he identified that he was headed down the wrong path in dentistry of overwork and what it was doing to his home life. And he just,
Yeah.
my
Well,
home
I
is
think he focused it. Where I think we're together on is he focuses on really the health of the dentist and how it all works together. And if you can be a better version of you, you can be a better dentist, and then that in turn becomes a better you for home. I think the other pearl I have would be perfection is the enemy of good in dentistry. And I think dentists really get mired down with that, and they just don't know when to let go and say, okay, this is what I can do. And I think I think of this often. I see dentistry in some patients and it looks awful. I'm like, gosh, what happened with that dentist, But the patient probably only allowed, so, the patient probably was probably the limiting factor there. Maybe they just weren't cooperative and that's what happened. And I feel like I've done really great dentistry through my years. Because I don't have a lot of redos, things work and patients have been happy. But I follow that where I just don't get mired down like, okay, I know when I'm tapping out the patient, like, okay, they're like done. Okay, so you need to wrap it up. You can't just keep going on and on and on. You'll lose them. And I think that's really important to be able to measure that and not overextend that, because I think, again, that'll in turn be written down as a bad experience.
You've also, I think, and I know you're leaning this way with the dentists you want to coach, is that they also need to know when they're tapping out themselves.
Yeah.
And I worked hard as a dentist, and I'm very lucky to have a very good wife who, we, that she was focused on bringing up the children and spending that time, that I probably am very lucky that they've forgiven me for that, because I try and spend as much time with them now. But I tell this story, and that she and I work in coaching, and so we've done trade shows, and we were at a trade show in 2020, and the stand next to us was a guy, and I didn't recognize him, but because I think he had a beard, but he used to come and service my chairs and handpieces. And he said to me, I can't believe the difference between you in 2020 and you that I knew in 2014 and before. He said, you were just so tightly wound as a dentist. And even in that 6 years of coaching, he said, you have started to unwind dramatically, that you're a different sort of person. And I remember treating a patient who I acquired a practice. A dentist gave me his filing cabinet, and he was closing his office, and I acquired this patient, and he was a retiring obstetrician. And I remember in the 6 years I treated him, he started to unwind. You could see that the tension, the first time that I met him, he was like so highly strained. That's a tough job. You're dealing with two lives. You're bringing someone into the world, but you also try not to kill the mother as well. It's a tough business. And like you're talking about being an emergency doctor, you can't time when those babies are going to come, so dinner parties, all that sort of stuff, middle of the night. He was very highly tightly wound, and he started to unwind. And so my memory of him is that that's something to be avoided as a medical practitioner, to just make sure that you do smell the coffee along the way. Remembering that dentistry, as you know, is a great career. It's a great opportunity to make money and have a good lifestyle. And that's the reward for the education and your investment in a practice as well. It's not a salary that the public think. But when we think that that opportunity is often wasted or not remembered by dentists, and they become slaves to their own profession, and that's a sad part about dentistry as well. So as you move forward as a coach and getting dentists to balance up that opportunity again, I think that you're going to be a great person to bring hope to some people who don't know the answer. They identify there's a problem and they go, this can't be what it's worth, what dentistry is about. And I think that you're going to be a really successful coach when
Thank
you
you.
look at the dentists in that, and there's plenty of them. Half of the dentists don't want to be dentists in America. Half the dentists in America don't want to be dentists in America because they can't see the way. So I think you're going to show them that way.
Yeah.
So, Mark,
I
tell us
think
that
it's a
website again. Tell us that website.
I'm sorry.
Tell us that website again.
It's called dentalsimplified.com.
And that's the easiest way for them to find you?
Yes.
But you were saying you think it's...
Well, it's a process. I mean, who I am now obviously is not who I was when I got out of dental school. And like you said, you were wound up, and look, you morphed into this, that you can really see the bigger picture of it. And, I think the ability to have someone help you early on recognize that gives you a lot more productive years. If you're like, find the easy path and find the shortcut to finding that sweet spot.
It is there is an answer to every problem. I heard a lawyer say that. There is a solution to every problem. And the reason people get frustrated is they don't know the solution, or they don't try to find the solution. And it's the same in dentistry. Sadly, it can have dire consequences for people who go down the rabbit hole too far. And there's no need for that. And I think that what you're going to do for dentists is to really show them something so that they can make ownership and practicing dentistry a much more enjoyable experience. It's a shame when we find people who, and the younger generations are doing this, they're getting careers, they're getting degrees, and then they go, oh, I don't like this. And so they're going back to school in their 40s. How long do they think they're going to live? Whereas, as you mentioned, you took a year off. Me, I got a transfer after second year. I always wanted to be a doctor. I got a transfer to medicine after 2 years of dentistry. And I go, 3 more years of dentistry, and then I'm out working and having an income. I don't want to go back to school for another 5, 6, 7 more years. It's too much of my life to give up to studying.
Right.
And so, congratulations on what you're doing. Mark, it's been
Thank you.
a pleasure chatting with you on the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Thank you very much for being a guest. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you, David. I enjoyed it as much.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of our dental community and joining us each week on this incredible journey. If you found value in today's episode and you don't want to miss out on future episodes packed with expert insights and actionable strategies, here's how you can stay connected with us. Firstly, hit that subscribe button. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on our website, subscribing ensures you'll never miss an episode. Secondly, share the love. If you know a fellow dentist or colleague who could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge that we share here, please share our podcast with them. Also, please share the podcast on your socials by simply clicking on the social icons wherever you view or listen to this podcast. Together, we can all do our bit to elevate the dental profession. And finally, stay engaged with us. We love hearing from you. Your questions, comments, and feedback fuel our mission to provide the best content for your professional growth, your personal growth, and for your practice growth. Remember, your journey to creating a dental practice and a business life that you love is our mission, and we're excited to be your trusted guide along the way. Thank you for being a part of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Until next time, keep smiling, keep striving, and keep on tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast.